data people, we have you covered in today's podcast. We're talking all about surveying community members, staff, students, parents, and we got the experts in here. We got school perceptions. My friends, Rob and Scott, are going to share why research matters, what the first question you need to answer. They're going to talk through what's the best method of conducting surveys and how to get good response rates. We're going to talk about what is an average response rate, which is really good. And we're going to also dive into some of the mistakes that schools are doing when they're trying to get data. So you're really going to enjoy this podcast. Guys, if you haven't yet left a review on this podcast, could you do that? Go over to your favorite podcast app and give us a 5-star. That 5-star review, along with maybe a few sentences or two of how this has helped your school and your communication and your social media efforts, would help us help even more schools, because that's what our mission is, right? Social School for EDU, me, Andrea Gribble, we want to help schools communicate and connect and engage with their communities. And that 5-star review would really be a help to us to do that. All right. Now, before we get into today's insightful and very informative podcast interview, let's get to this week's K-12 PR tip. All right. Today's K-12 PR tip is all about your back to school social media content. Don't forget about introducing your new staff members on social media. You can do this before the doors are even open, before the back to school open house event. Welcoming in your new staff faces with a simple welcome to our community, or whether you want it to be a little more in depth with some information about who that new staff member is, what they're going to be doing, and maybe even an excitement quote about how excited they are to be joining your team would be so helpful. We're seeing posts around the country get 50, 60, 70 comments of people engaging. Maybe it's future students, the parents, maybe it's the parents of the new staff member that got their job, their first job, right? Their first teaching job, or, they're a paraprofessional in your school or district, and they get a shout out from family members. It will help grow your engagement. It will help grow your followers, and it'll ultimately make sure that the great stories are being told. It ultimately leads to good engagement, and that's what it's all about. So please announce your new staff on social media. And if you have a great way that you have shared that, whether it be an image, whether it be a little video intro, whatever you'd like, and you want to share it with me, I'm always here. Andrea at socialschoolforedu.com. I love to learn from you, and I love to cheer you on. So let's get to this week's episode with Rob and Scott from School Perceptions. All right, we've got two for the price of one on today's podcast. Super excited to be joined by my friends at School Perceptions. So before we kind of dive into all the data and things that we want to be able to talk about today, I'd love for you guys to share your background and the work that you each do at School Perceptions. So Rob, DeMeuse, do you want to go first?
Absolutely. So like Andrea said, my name is Rob DeMeuse. I serve as the research director at School Perceptions, but it certainly wasn't a direct route here. What is when you're an adult? So I was born and raised in rural northeastern Wisconsin, and ended up getting my teaching degree from UW-Madison. And I taught high school social studies for a while. I taught civics to the freshmen and U.S. history to the juniors. And then for reasons that I will come to terms with, I decided I'd go to grad school. It's more fun when it's paid off, but I did it. And I got my PhD from the University of Wisconsin, where I studied political behavior in school referendums, which is kind of a fancy and less interesting way to say, in school referendums, why do people vote the way they do? Why do they vote yes? Why do they vote no? Why do they change their minds, or why do they not? So I found a good home at School Perceptions, continuing to do that kind of work related to referendums, but then certainly keeping my teacher hat on firmly and doing a lot of our staff, student, and parent engagement surveys too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that introduction. My daughter is a student at UW-Madison, so she is very much enjoying her time there. So how about you, Scott? Why don't you share your background?
Yeah, well, I'm also a UW-Madison graduate, so glad to hear we've got that commonality here on the pod. I started with school perceptions in January of this year, which makes it easy to count how long I've been there. So it's been 6 months. Before that, I was a K-12 education reporter for some local newspapers, as well as here in Madison for the Cap Times. And so I spent about a decade after graduating from college covering K-12 education, covered some referendum projects, actually covered some work school perceptions had done with a district I was covering on their staff, student, and parent surveys, and really just appreciated the way it helped schools respond to what their communities, staff, parents, and students are saying. And so eventually connected with our company here and have been doing a lot of work on the community survey side of things this spring.
Okay, awesome. And can one of you just explain a little bit what school perceptions does, how you partner with schools to help them? There are a lot of my listeners right now
Mhm.
that are going to be that either have had referendums or bonds, or some that are going to vote this November. So it is
Mhm.
really timely that we're chatting now. So will one of you just kind of explain what school perceptions does?
Yeah, I'll start first, and then Scott will fill in everything that I missed. So I think one of the first questions we ask folks is what problem are you trying to solve? And that's not necessarily referendum specific. It often is, but it doesn't necessarily need to be so. It could be, related to students that are enrolled in special education. We're concerned that they have a different level of engagement at school than students not. That's still a problem that we want to help you identify if you think it's there. Our boss tells us a quote, and I'll get it right, otherwise I'll hear hell for it later. If you're lost in the woods and you have a map, it doesn't do you any good if you don't know where you are. So first I nodded for a while because I wanted to, make him happy. And then I thought about it and I thought, I guess that's true. So we need to help identify a problem. You need to help identify the issue first. What problem are you asking your community to help you solve? And only then are you ready to ask a question about it. But then that question needs to be explained in a way that a community member can understand. And in turn, then a school can understand what a community member wants from them. So for instance, you might come in and say, boy, we're growing like a weed. We might have to add on to a school. Well, is that the solution? Are you going to build a new school? Are you going to add on to your school? Is that a problem? Is it much more growth than you had before? So you need to come to us, I think, a little bit with what are you asking from your community? Otherwise, the survey is going to be all over the board, and you really won't get very good data from your community. So coming in knowing what it is you want help with, because once we put pen to paper, that will become very clarified. It's hard to beat around the bush when you have pen to paper. So in short, we will help you identify the problem because that's what you have to do before you can solve it.
Okay. And you mainly help identify that problem by helping with surveys in the community. Is that right?
Community, and I guess I would define school community in a very general sense. It could be
Okay.
community members that are grandma and grandpa or aunt and uncle that have never once had kids in school, or their kids are in school 50 years ago, but they still live there. It could be parents, could be students, could be staff members. So school community we use in a very broad way. In general, when we talk about a community survey, it includes folks that are not employed by the school or don't have a kiddo in school.
Okay. And do you serve schools just in Wisconsin or do you serve schools all over?
All over.
Oh,
So we actually had a decent amount of work in Alaska for a while. There was a superintendent that moved from Wisconsin to Alaska, and then took our name with. So we have worked in all 50 states. I would say most of our business is in the Midwest, not necessarily Wisconsin specifically, but we do a lot of work in the Midwest. And we actually just updated the number this morning. So we've now worked with over 1,000 school districts nationwide.
okay. And when did school perceptions, when were they formed?
Oh, 2002.
2002. So 22 years doing this right now. That's a lot. Scott, do you want to expand a little bit on that at all in regards to how school perception serves schools?
Yeah, I think Rob covered most of it. I think a thing I'll dig into and stress is just you asked, what is the community or sort of what does that mean? And I think we have to think about how the folks we're surveying or a school district is surveying have interacted with the school or are interacting with the district right now. Maybe they just go to a football game on Friday night. maybe, as Rob said, they have never sent anyone through the schools and have never stepped foot in that building. And yet, if it's for a referendum, they're going to have a vote. If it's for coming up with a strategic plan or direction for the district, well, they might have some input or thoughts on how it impacts their home value or something like that. And so thinking about that audience, we like to think about our surveys as a two-way communication device, an interactive newsletter in some ways. And you just have to think through who that audience is you're reaching and what their familiarity level is and how you're going to write about your problems, right? Because Rob always talks about your random resident doesn't know anything about tertiary aid, right? And so we need to not get too into the weeds where we're even getting to that concept, but explain how things in a complicated school finance world impact the community and the schools. So it's finding that balance.
Yeah. And sometimes we think we know what the community thinks, but sometimes you're listening to the loudest person or you're skewed by your own bias. So let's just jump in a little bit. Scott, if you can help me why is data so important for schools and why do you think it's hard for schools to get good data? I guess if you could kind of break into that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think when you talk, I think you have to assume people are smart, curious, and don't have time for you. And
Okay.
so we think about that a lot when we're writing our surveys. And I think that's one of the challenges for schools is those folks are so steeped in the work every single day. And so for them, it is top of mind. It is the most important thing in their lives. For your average resident, again, especially those folks who are non-parents, maybe not staff, uh, they have other things going on and their attention is diverted in a lot of directions. And so you have to capture their attention, explain to them why it matters for them, how it's going to impact them and their lives very quickly. And so I think that's one of the challenges to getting data, especially from those folks who aren't directly involved with schools, is, we've been doing some research lately and reading about how to improve our surveys. And we've seen some research that says folks will look at their phone every 4 minutes on average. People read about 269 words a minute. So you've got less than 1,000 words before they're looking at their phone. And then their attention's elsewhere. Or maybe they didn't have a text message and they come back to it, but maybe they did and they aren't. So you have to grab their attention and explain to them why what you're asking of them matters very quickly. Otherwise, you're just not going to get the data. At the same time, you have to respect their time, tell them what they need to know, and give them the information they need to answer the question thoughtfully. And so that's a really tough balance and something I think we're always looking to improve on. And we work with districts to understand the stories, their community, the conversations that are already going on in their community. But then we kind of really reinforce, you got to tell them what they need to know. You got to tell them what you need, why you need it, and why it matters. You got to use specific information. So a lot of times, we drill down on as specific tax information as you can for a lot of folks. How's this going to affect my taxes? Is something that comes up a lot. And so we have to be specific because the less specific you are, the less meaningful your results are going to be. Yeah, I think we like to think about what questions people are going to ask, and you have to answer those in your survey so that you can then ask them the questions you need to know.
Okay. So I love, first of all, that you assume that people are smart, they are curious, but they don't have time. And then the fact of, capturing their attention and explaining it really quickly. It's an interesting stat of, every 4 minutes we somebody looks at their phone. And sometimes they're going to be getting the message on their phone, which is probably even more of a distraction because there's other, things popping up and
yeah,
right.
A lot of things to click on your phone.
Yeah. And so I think really the struggle is real. I've got a lot of listeners that are really grounded in the work of school communications and the RPI process, right? Research, planning, implementation, evaluation, and that R is so important, but it really is hard to get good data. And so like what tips do you have for schools when they're trying to gather survey data from their community?
I'm going to let Scott go in and then I'm going to follow up with a bad analogy of what he's done.
Okay, awesome. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to just um, thinking about what questions your community is going to have and answering those before you ask them the questions you want information on. Because otherwise, if you don't answer those questions, well, they're either putting the survey down and just saying, I don't have time for this and I don't want to learn more, or they're reaching out to you with questions. Now you have to interact back. You have to have a staff member assigned. You have to find the right person to talk to them. There's a process now. And if you're doing that with a bunch of different community members and their individual questions, how much feedback are you getting? How consistent are you? And so it's just about thinking through, what is a community member going to need to know to give us the information we need to get. Rob, go ahead.
I often think of it like if somebody said, "Do you want to buy a new car?" Maybe. I don't know. What's wrong with my car? How much is it going to cost to fix? Do I need to be concerned? Is it a safety thing that's really going to amp up how much of a priority it is? What are you going to sell me? How expensive is it? What's the safety ratings on the new car? Does it look nice, or is it a beater? What year is it? So I gotta know some things before I can give you some feedback, but don't weigh me down in all these details where I'm going to lose you because you're a mechanic and I'm not. You got to tell me what's wrong, but then help me along the way. So, to Scott's point, ESSER funding is now on its way out the door, right? Well, maybe I don't even know that you got it, or if I did, maybe I read that, schools got billions of dollars over the last couple of years. Well, maybe that's true in aggregate, but how much did we get? So you got to pose those questions for people that they don't necessarily know they need the answer to yet. And how early are you going to do that? Well, what in God's name is a revenue limit? That sounds like it's something for a business, and that sounds like we're capping how much money you can make in the private sector. Well, schools have revenue limits too, but don't introduce a revenue limit to me the very first time I need your feedback on a revenue limit, because then I'm trying to figure out what it is and then trying to figure out how my budget's going to be affected by it. So if you know that you have some things that you want questions on, or if you know coming up that you're going to need data on something, then how can you use your communication channels that you're already using so that people can have an answer for you? I don't know if it's true that people need to hear something 7 times before they remember it. I have no reason to believe it's not true. So, you can't just go to the 7th time and expect people to be able to answer your question in the right way. And again, it doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. It just means that they're very smart doing something else. And it may not be fixing cars.
Right. So if you're explaining what they need to know before you're asking, are you saying that is in the intro of a digital survey that they get? Or are you saying that, like you just said, Rob, they got to hear it 7 times? So are you starting to communicate those things way prior to actually launching the survey so that they might be able to see it in a newsletter, on the website, in a social media post, at a meeting that's happening, school board meeting, maybe you got people there. Are you...
Yes is the answer to that, which is unsatisfying. Okay. So the answer first is there are districts that use our surveys as the very first time that somebody's learning about something, and that I don't think that's wrong. Sometimes you have a problem come up and you don't know about it, and that's okay. And you want to get data back very quickly, or there's an issue at school that you want to be able to fix immediately, and that's okay. But sometimes we'll work with districts, and they completed an assessment of their facilities 5 years ago, and they have it, and they have a long-term plan. Well, don't wait until you need feedback from me. Let people know, hey, there's leaks in the locker room. There's water on the gym floor, and the hoods and the vents in the science labs don't work all that well. Well, then it sounds like, well, how did you not know it sounds like you're pulling the wool over my eyes. Like, how did you just learn about this? Or if this was a problem so long, then why are you waiting to the last second to tell me? And you don't obviously just use communications as a way to tell you what's wrong, and then, maybe your math team and your basketball team are both going to state. That's a great thing. So it's not just everything that's wrong, it's celebrations along the way. But if you know you're going to need something, don't wait. And we work with districts who come back and need financial help every 3 years. So they reach out and say, hey, time to re-up our survey. So in the middle, then they're saying, hey, you were really generous with your tax dollars last time around. Here's how we used it. Here's how you're helping us, because this it increases our revenue limit. Well, again, what in God's name is a revenue limit? As a reminder, this is what you did. So I think to Scott's point from earlier on, we try to present enough background information so that I can answer the question while getting an off ramp to people for if I want to learn more, if I want to review that facility assessment, amazing. Here's exactly where it is on our website, and we have a QR code for you as well. But we're going to respect your time, and we're not going to overburden you and use construction or architecture or education jargon. We're going to show you where that is and allow you the freedom to be able to understand that, but we'll provide you enough background information to be able to answer the question, even if you chose not to do that.
Is there a magic number of questions that you should ask in a survey? Scott or Rob?
I'm curious what Scott has to say. I don't,
Yeah.
when we redid our surveys about 5 years ago, and there was bloat, there was fat, it needed to be cut. We didn't think about it as questions. We thought about kind of Scott's point earlier on, how long is this going to take me? So, thinking about when I was a teacher before, days that I could go to the bathroom and eat lunch, pretty good day, and that's while you're on prep and you have 3 kids in your room asking for help and one who wants to eat in there because they get bullied in the cafeteria. So I'm not taking a half-hour survey. Don't ask me to. I'm just going to click things, and you're not going to get good data from that. So instead, we looked at how long is this going to take me, and on average, a community survey takes about 10 minutes. So I guess two and a half phone interruptions if you're measuring phone interruptions. For a staff survey, depending on whether I choose to leave comments, a staff member could complete a survey in about 8 minutes. And that seems reasonable to us. Same thing for parents, especially for the kiddos. We have 4th graders that take our surveys, and that's a good use of that student data. We don't go a whole lot younger than that, but try having a 3rd grader take a half-hour survey, and that's going to go about as well as you expect it to go. So don't do that, So we really try to measure it in terms of time, not necessarily in terms of number of questions. But to answer your point more directly, it's about 25 to 30 questions for the adults, for the staff, and for parents, and a little bit less than that for the kiddos.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Scott?
Well, and no, I think Rob covered it pretty well for the staff, student, and parent in those surveys. On our community surveys, when a district is making long-term plans or considering a referendum, it just depends on how far along they are in the planning, what they're asking their community to consider. I think for those surveys, the simpler the better. For community members, often the more direct you can get their feedback from them, the more useful it's going to be for you interpreting their feedback as well. Too many questions just means a lot of data that can make it harder to interpret and use. So we definitely think about that when we're designing those surveys.
Okay.
People want to give you feedback on your plans. They don't want to build your plans because they don't know. How would I know what a boiler looks like? How do I know if I'm thinking about a parent survey and I'm not a parent? I don't know what time the buses come. I don't know how long the kindergartners are on the bus. Like you tell me what you need. I'll tell you whether I like it or not.
Right. So delivering a community survey versus maybe an internal survey. I often tell people, so of course, social media is my expertise. And sometimes if we get staff that's nominating a student as a student who shines, okay, a student that's recognized, I'll say, if you give them like 3 minutes in a meeting for them to be able to complete and think of a student and send it to you right then, like you're going to get a lot of participation versus just emailing them out and saying, hey, can you respond to this? So I have a question for you. In internal surveys, when you're doing it with staff and with students, do you often try to give them time within a set meeting, or are you just emailing them out and expecting them to do it in their free time?
So I guess in general, there are 3 things that help decide whether I'm going to take a survey. One of them was, how long is it?
Okay.
When is it? Don't send me the survey on December 23rd. Even mid-February when there's 6 hours of daylight, that I'm probably not in the best mood. Maybe not the world's greatest time for a survey. And then how are you setting up for me? Is there time in a meeting? And that does work best, frankly. If there's a professional development day, we just got done working with the district at the very end of the year, and then towards the end of their in-service, I think the kiddos were gone again by that point. Half an hour, everybody go do this, and then we'll come back and we'll start something else. That's especially true for the students. We've worked with districts who have just emailed it out and hoped for the best. And again, that'll go about as well as you think it would. And then 8% of students take it, and it's all over the board. So the more time you can carve out, yes, but it does come electronically. We make a paper option available for folks. But by sending it out via email, we attach a one-time code to it, which means that everybody can take the survey. So nobody's voice is unheard, but you can only take it once. Nobody's voice is allowed to be any louder than anybody else's. And we want that to be pretty inclusive. And we're kind of the mind where if you want to know how things are going on at school, ask the administrative assistants and the janitors. They'll tell you. And respect their time as well and include them in the process because they're busy folks too, the busiest probably. So we do recommend carving out time, but we will send it electronically just to make sure that everybody has an opportunity without being able to skew the data in the way that they want to see it be skewed.
Okay. And then Scott, when we talk about getting surveys out to the community, what are some of the best practices there? I'm assuming giving some time to get it completed, but not, 2 months to get it back. You got to have some timeliness. So how are you getting that out to the community?
People do operate on deadlines. We always see, there's a date that we print on those surveys, and we always see a spike the last weekend.
At least
So
as
what
a journalist,
we do,
that's what you had to do, right? As a journalist, you
I
got to work
also
on deadlines.
operate,
Yeah.
So I understand that mindset very, very well. We work with districts to get a mailing list for every residence in their boundaries, and
Okay.
we actually mail a physical survey to every residence in that district. So all apartments and all households get a single mailed survey. Those surveys have a unique access code, as Rob was just talking about, that allows folks to take it once. So everyone can take it, but not multiple times, so that again, everyone's voice is on equal footing. And I think what's really important about that is everyone has the opportunity to weigh in. Now, many will still choose not to. Our response rates are usually in the high teens. I think we average between 15 to 17%, somewhere in there. And that's fantastic response rate. But the key is no one can come and say, well, you didn't ask me. And so we really, we want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to participate. You can't make them participate, but they have that opportunity. And so we will send that out to every household. And then some districts will choose to communicate, put reminders on social media or, tease the survey in a newsletter if they regularly send out newsletters, things like that. But that varies district to district and what their kind of built-in communications methods are.
But they would have to have that access code in order to use it. And so when you say you mail it out to everybody, is it a full page? Is it a postcard size? And then there's a QR code? Because I'm assuming you're not mailing out the written option. It's a link.
We are mailing out the written option, and people can mail them back. We include prepaid postage for folks who like to take it. It does have a link and a QR code to our website where folks can go and take it online. And that is probably about 70 to 80% of folks take it online. But we still do get reliably surveys mailed back, and we have some data entry to include those. Folks, like to sit down with a cup of coffee sometimes at their kitchen table and read it through on paper and mark their answers. People do need that code to take it online. Oftentimes, maybe we usually give one code per household. So maybe both spouses want to take it or something like that. We will always provide the district with extra access codes so that someone can call and say, oh, we both want to take this survey and have our opinions heard. And so then they can provide that code. Somebody can log in. Someone could take the paper survey and someone else could use a code to take the online version. But yeah, so districts can promote sort of going and taking the survey or watching out in the mail for the survey to arrive. But they can't link directly to the survey because we need that one-time access code.
Yeah, that makes sense. How long do you usually leave it open once it hits their mailbox and I'm grabbing it from my mailbox? Is it usually like a 2-week window that you would leave? Do you have an average?
I don't know if we have an average. I think it's about 3 weeks, somewhere in the 2.5 to 3 week range. Make sure there's a few weekends in there.
Okay. Awesome.
I agree with everything Scott said to addend his 70 to 30 taking it online. It varies by age group too. So 55, 65 plus, there are times where we might get 50 to 60% of their responses through the mail.
Yeah.
And that's especially important when we're talking about a referendum because older folks vote so loyally that if you weren't including that option, you would be removing a group that will change an election. from yes to no or no to yes. And so it's on average, Scott's exactly right, 70 to 80% take it online. But
Okay.
that could also vary a lot in rural areas that just don't have the same reliable internet. A lot of paper copies that way as well.
Okay. So, what are some of the biggest mistakes that schools make when it comes to research? There's a lot of schools that try to do this on their own, and some that maybe succeed and get the answers that they want. And maybe even if they work with you or other outfits, still they want to do it their way. So, what would you say are maybe the three biggest mistakes that you see them make when it comes to doing some research like this, Scott?
Yeah, I think that's probably going to differ by staff, student, parent, and community. The thing that I see the most, I would say, and we have the most conversation around is just it goes back to that attention span and the level and amount of information you provide. I think a lot of districts, and I understand why, want to provide every piece of information, justification, list every single step they've taken throughout a strategic planning process over the last 20 years. You're going to lose people.
Yeah.
And that work is important. And so I never want to devalue that work that happened, but recognizing what someone needs to know to take the survey is different than what work was important. And so I think just folks getting past that point of recognizing what someone needs versus what they want to share is probably the biggest challenge I see districts as they're considering surveying their communities.
Okay.
Rob, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Yeah, one related to kind of the referendum world, one related to the other side, the staff, student, and parent world. I guess I'm just going to agree with Scott to reinforce his point. You might have had 25 community meetings and they went through every page of your facility assessment. Well, that's good. I mean, I kind of expect you to have a community group maybe, and I kind of expect you to go through don't tell me things that I'm already expecting you to do. And is that really the number one thing that I want people to remember? And the answer is no. What are you going to do? How much is it going to cost me? Emphasis on the second part. How much is this going to cost me? The sooner you can get to that point, the more people know whatever. Doesn't matter if it's on Twitter, it doesn't matter if it's on Facebook, doesn't matter if it's in my hands and it's tangible. Then I know that thing is for me because I'm either paying taxes or I'm a parent. Don't make me guess if this thing that you're communicating with me is for me or not. Because if I have to guess, I'm going to assume it's not. So don't make me guess. For the staff, student, and parent, you need to tell people how you're going to use the data. I guess that's true for community surveys as well, just a little bit more clear on that end. But things really come off the rails if somebody calls us and says, well, we do the survey every year. It's just that time. Well, it might be that time of the year, but what have you done in the meantime? Have you looked at the data? Have you disaggregated it by employee groups or grade levels, or by students that have different characteristics? Because the worst thing you can do for your response rates, in addition to what I mentioned before, is not doing anything with the data. That makes people mad and cynical. And then you can't just do something. You can't make a change or intervention and then not tell me. I need time to feel it, and I need to know that you did something. Don't assume that people know what changes you made. And then you do a survey that's too soon after that, and all of a sudden, well, now I haven't had time to decide whether I like what you've done. I can't decide whether it's working for me yet. So tell me how you're going to use my data. Tell me when I can expect a change, and then give me enough time to understand whether I'm going to feel that change or not. Otherwise, I feel like I'm not going to give you 10 minutes of my day if this is just some box checking exercise so that you can say you asked and then do something that you know you were going to do anyhow, because that really makes people mad. And then it's not just right now that you're shooting yourself in the foot. It's going to be surveys many years down the road and maybe even for your successor as well. That's a toxic taste in people's mouths.
Yeah.
To the point Rob was making about give time to feel the change or understand a change was made, that can differ by group too, right? So a parent or a staff member is going to feel a change pretty quickly. Parent, probably a little slower, but relatively quickly. Your random community member who isn't connected to the school, not going to feel a change for probably a couple of years. And so thinking through frequency of surveys based on the group you're surveying and when data could actually change and will be meaningful is really important.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of what you would survey students for? So you mentioned like third and fourth graders. What type of a survey would that be about? Just an example.
Yeah, so some of the questions in there, are my teachers explaining things in a way that I get?
Okay.
Do I have an adult I can talk to at school when I have a big problem? Are there other kids that I can sit with at lunch? Do I talk to people outside of school about what I'm learning? That's a big measure of engagement. So it's a lot of interpersonal connection. And do I feel safe at school? And then do I feel like I'm being challenged, or at least do I feel like I'm being set up in a way for academic success? And questions are only half the battle, so to speak. We actually begin our surveys not with the questions, but off of the response scale. So an agreement Likert scale is very common. But it's okay, and it's almost encouraged to have a couple of different survey scales, because if I'm just being asked agreement the whole time, I get bored and I kind of turn off a little bit. I do check my phone. So it's okay to mix it up and then put in a great, good, fair, poor, or maybe a frequency scale. More to your point, though, for students, it is an agreement kind of scale, but we have a definitely sort of not really know with some emojis to also make sure that students that are nonverbal or just can point and have an aid or even on their own get some help that way. We approach it that way first, and then say, well, based on this scale, what kind of questions are we going to ask? And then we make sure that your average third grader could answer them. And if a third grader can answer them, then a senior can answer them, and kind of working up that way. And those are especially true for kind of those transition points. So we have some special surveys too, where if you start middle school at sixth grade, then maybe survey at fifth and then sixth, because chances are if students are making a transition, it's going to be harder. Their scores are going to get a little lower. And then from eighth to ninth grade as well. So that's kind of where do I have an adult I can talk to at school? And am I finding my way with other kids? Those questions like that are really going to pop up to the top. Because that's really important just for being willing to go to school.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And that obviously feeds then into the leadership and what the staff and the support staff work on in order to make changes and
Correct.
support our students. What are some of the best results you've seen schools achieve? You said you've worked with over 1,000 schools now over the past 22 years. So what are some of the best results you've seen schools achieve because they've gotten good data, they analyzed it properly, and ultimately it ended up benefiting students? Do you have a favorite story or two that you could share with us, and maybe not name the school by name, but just kind of give us some details? I don't know who wants to go. Scott, I know you've only worked there 6 months, but you probably have some experience already.
Rob's thinking. I see his thinking face. I recognize that. I see it every day.
So I'm thinking both in terms of the magnitude of the change and what the change is, because sometimes we're a part of that, sometimes we're not. So one of the things going back to the beginning, we help you identify the problem. We're not necessarily there as every bit to solve the problem. There are great partners that do that.
Yeah.
And we're by no means experts in best practices in staff salary compensation. So what we'll see is there may be a low score. And I can think of a couple of districts who have increased a certain metric by 20 to 25%. That is not normal. I can maybe count on one hand the number of times I've seen that happen when people want to know what is a normal amount to increase. First, any increase is good. When we look at our statewide, so when I say statewide, specifically for Wisconsin, that's where most of our customers are. If we pool all the data together, there are actually 0 questions for staff that increased from last year to this year. Every item decreased in terms of staff engagement. So any increase is good. When you talk about an increase, I would say that about a 3 to 5% increase is something good. Don't set yourself up for 20% increases. You're never going to get there. It's not common. More to your point, I think when I think about those student surveys specifically, some districts have really seen some good growth when they figure out those transition points and then they set up student mentoring. So I don't want to know from my teachers how to open my locker and where my biology class is. Like I'm in high school now. I don't want to be held, literally have my hand held by a teacher. I want to know that there's a junior or senior out there that when I'm having a problem and I don't even know who to return my basketball jersey, or which one's the JV locker room, which one's the varsity locker room, whatever the case is. I want to ask another student that. So some of those pre-school year mentoring programs have really helped a lot, and then I know a face and there's somebody I can go to. And I can think of a couple of districts that have really said, boy, there's always a dip from 8th to 9th grade. There's always a dip from 5th to 6th grade if that's when you start middle school. We know that's going to happen. How do we keep that dip as small as possible? And those mentoring-ships have really, I think, paid off.
Okay. And what about from a referendum standpoint? Do you have any stories on that? I mean, I'm assuming that there are school districts that come to you after failing 2 or 3 questions in a row over the past decade. And it's like, okay, we really need to pass this, but we've got to dig in and do our research. And once they really understood what the community supported, they were able to get the right ballot question and drive that support. Do you have an example or a summary of how that works? Because I just think that would be helpful for my listeners.
Yeah, I can think of a school district in a very rural part of the country that we worked in that was 50-50. I'm only going to vote for a new school ever. Don't remodel what we have. I went through that school, never going to get there. 50%, don't ever build a new school. That school is fine. I went through there. It's just fine, save for the fact that maybe my desk was bolted to the floor when I went through. But 50-50, right down every time we did a survey over and over again. And then they would do something and it would fail. And then they would switch it up and they would fail. So finally they said, look, folks, here are options. First off, since this started, our costs have increased by 20%. So what we would have built a new school for before, that's going to cover part of our renovations now because we essentially lost 10 years of this and kids are still going through and they haven't seen, I mean, basically a full cohort of kiddos has gone through and hasn't seen a different school. So what they finally said is, we're at the tip top of what we are legally allowed to borrow. We can do it. That's fine. Or we have some projects that we could start to bite off and chew if we're going to go the renovations route. So they kind of said, look, we know that both would be great. So it really came down to money. How much money are you willing to see leave your wallet for whatever it is you want? And it ultimately it came to, it wasn't enough for a new school. And it was maybe 3/4 of the cost. So they finally said, that's the fork in the road. We cannot go down that path anymore because a new school is not going to get any cheaper. We have to take that off the table because even if you want a new school, we heard that you are not willing to pay for it. And that's not going to work. You can't build part of a school, can't build part of a 3rd grade classroom. There are some things you can shave off, obviously, here and there, the extent of the auditorium and 3 courts versus 2 courts in the gym, but you can't build half a science lab. So they really let it come down to money. And they said, this is what we are going to use. And it worked. They're not building a new high school. They're going to get a like new high school based off of what their community told them. And then they're going to do it in chunks, in phases over time to help keep that cost down. And then, they pay a little bit down. Then they're going to restart the next phase to kind of keep that tax rate as level as it can possibly be. And that was painful. I mean, nobody was happy. Everybody was bummed about it. And it was on either side. So it's not fun to have to talk about money, but it's how things are paid for is money. And when that finally answered the question, there's lots of things I would love to do to my house. I'd love to do new floors and our roof could use some work. And, our furnace and air conditioning are about 20 years old. All those are priorities. But if they're all priorities at the same time, I can't afford all of them. I got to pick and choose. Came down to money in my house, came down to money for them on their school.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good comparison. I mean, and if you really they were able to really lay that out, so then it's like, okay, now I finally get it. Like I can't have my cake and eat it too, and we can't keep doing this. So that is a great success story. Anything you'd like to add to that, Scott?
Yeah, and I don't know that I would call it a success story, but I think it's a great way of using the information. As earlier, I think you mentioned sometimes without a survey, you're just hearing from the loudest voices, from folks who have a really passionate belief in, their athletic involvement, their group or club, their performance. And so they're saying we need a new auditorium, we need a new set of athletic fields. And, you as a school leader might agree, but you just don't have the support. And I think a survey and using a survey to get that answer is very useful to either show them, hey, you're right, this is something the community says we need, or to say, listen, like, it's not that I disagree with you, but we can't pay for it. because a lot of times it comes down to that money, as Rob was talking about. And so I think using the information you can get from a survey to answer those questions of your community is also really useful.
And surveying takes money, it takes time. But if you think about having to go and ask the wrong question and then have it fail, and you were just talking basically time value of money. I mean, what used to cost this much now is 20% higher. And historically, the pricing for buildings has never gone down, right? So it's going to continue to go up. So time is money. So I think making the decision with the right information is always going to be worth it for these schools. And everybody listening, hopefully this helps. If you might need to pass this on to your school board or your administrative team to also listen to this, to really think through how data can help your school operate and ultimately drive success for kids, by getting the right data. And we're not all experts in how to do this. School Perceptions obviously is.
If you find somebody, let us know.
Yeah, no, I'm talking to them. So this is good. So as we wrap up, this is the Mastering Social Media for Schools podcast. Do each of you have a favorite like social media tip when it comes to schools and school storytellers? Or maybe one. Scott, what would yours be?
Yeah, I think my biggest one is don't start an account just to have an account. Know how you're going to use it, have a plan how to use it, because once you start it, and if you don't use it clearly or in a way that people are responding to, they're never going to look at it again. And you've now lost a potential person who might have looked at it. So yeah, have a plan.
Yeah, I love that. And 'tis the season right now. It's, school's starting again. New staff members are coming into schools and everybody thinks they need a page. And it's like, you can do some really strong things through a district presence, through a school presence versus breaking those down. Rob,
Yep.
any favorite tip that you would have?
I agree with Scott, and I think once you have an account, don't lose the voice. Don't make it sound like a press release. Like, my God, is that boring? I don't want to read a press release on your social media account. Like, let people write the way that people talk and be authentic, because that's just honest and it's easier to relate. It's easier to relate to, and sometimes it even means giving people the keys. We write blogs and little snippets in our library about things that we learned or tips, and I don't write them all because who wants to hear from me all the time? And Scott writes some, and our boss writes some, and we all have our own ways of talking. And our tech lead is a PhD in computer science, and we like to pretend we know what he's talking about, but we actually just nod our head a lot. But he writes some too, and that's exactly what we want. And so when you kind of hand the keys over, and a kid gets to describe what their 8 periods are like throughout the day, and what they're learning about, that's interesting and that seems authentic, and that's using your account in a way where it's relatable.
Yeah. And what you do is technical, Rob. I mean, as far as data and all of this stuff. So for you to say that, and Scott, you really talked about it before of, you got to capture people's attention and explain, and then, quickly have them be able to interpret it. I think social media obviously is the same, right? And we're not going to stop people in their tracks by using all of the acronyms like ESSER funding and revenue limits and things like that. But if we can explain it in other ways, and then celebrating what's actually happening at the
Yes.
school, right? There's a lot of ways to get that stuff out there. So, great conversation, guys. I put you on a spot with a lot of things, which obviously you had great answers for. If my listeners are looking to connect with School Perceptions, maybe learn a little bit more about how you can help them, what is the best way?
Yeah, they can reach out to us at info at schoolperceptions.com. And then our general number also is 262-644-4300. So we're happy to take phone calls or emails, and share whatever information we can.
We actually do
Okay.
answer the phone. You call it, and somebody does answer.
I love it. Well, we'll make sure to share that in the show notes. Also get people over to your website, which, like you said, you have some blogs there, that would be helpful. And these guys are the experts. And so, you definitely can reach out to them, just get some inquiries. I know, you work with a lot of the schools that we serve across Wisconsin and beyond as well. So thanks for your commitment and your expertise, in being able to help schools. It's certainly I don't know, it always seems to be more and more challenging when we're asking these questions. And as you get into these this November election, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But thank you guys both so much for hanging out with me today. And everybody will be back again next week with another awesome episode to help you celebrate your school. So we'll talk to you guys later. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.